Brazil is a home to over 200 million people, having a history that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests human life may have existed here for over 30,000 years. Its borders touch almost every country in South America. But Brazil stands apart from its neighbors in one significant way. It was colonized by Portugal, not Spain. This distinction shaped its culture, language, and history. But how did Portugal come to claim Brazil? And how did the nation become what it is today? In the 15th century, Europe was entering a bold new era. The age of exploration saw nations like Spain and Portugal venturing into uncharted waters. Portugal, despite being small, became a leader in maritime advancements under Prince Henry the Navigator. Using innovative caravels, Portuguese explorers reached farther than ever before, circling Africa's Cape of Good Hope and unlocking the lucrative spice trade. But while they celebrated success in the East, a new opportunity lay across the Atlantic. In 1500, Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral set sail toward India but was blown off course by Atlantic winds. On April 22, 1500, his fleet spotted land, an enormous, lush paradise cloaked in dense forests. Cabral had stumbled upon what is now Porto Seguro and claimed the land for Portugal. But then, Cabral and his crew had unknowingly arrived in what is now Brazil. Anchoring near present-day Porto Seguro, they encountered the indigenous Tupinamba people. These first interactions were a mix of curiosity and caution, marked by gestures and gift exchanges. Trinkets from Europe were traded for handcrafted ornaments from the Tupinamba, setting the stage for an often fraught relationship between the Portuguese and Brazil's indigenous peoples. Recognizing the significance of his discovery, Cabral formalized Portuguese claims with the Treaty of Porto Seguro in May 1500. This treaty, signed with the Tupinamba chiefs, officially granted Portugal sovereignty while promising to respect indigenous rights. However, the treaty, written in Portuguese, was full of ambiguities, paving the way for future exploitation. According to legend, a Tupinamba shaman warned Cabral, "You will take a heavy load from this land, heavier than you can imagine, but you will not carry it far." These words might have been hinted at the immense wealth extracted from Brazil and the human suffering that followed. The Portuguese soon discovered a valuable resource, pau-bracy or Brazilwood, a type of redwood tree highly valued and sought after in Europe for its dye. Coastal settlements were quickly established to harvest and ship Brazilwood, making it the first major economic activity in Brazil. But the rush for profits came at a cost. At first, relations between the Portuguese and Brazil's indigenous people seemed cooperative. The natives helped the settlers harvest and trade. But this harmony didn't last. As the redwood trees near the coast were depleted, the Portuguese moved further inland, disrupting native lands and communities. To meet the labor demands and sustain their growing plantations and economy, the Portuguese began enslaving the indigenous people. This led to devastating consequences. Many indigenous people died from overwork and fled into the wilderness, while diseases brought by Europeans also devastated the native populations. Those who escaped weren't safe for long, as missionaries and bandeirantes, Portuguese fortune hunters, pushed deeper into the interior, capturing and enslaving more people. By the mid-16th century, the once abundant Brazilwood forests had been decimated, and the Portuguese turned to new ventures. But the Portuguese domination was not without defiant resistance. Even as they expanded their control, resistance grew amongst the indigenous groups. At the same time, enslaved Africans began escaping to form secret communities called quilombos. The most famous of these was Palmares, a thriving society in northeastern Brazil with over 20,000 inhabitants. Palmares became a symbol of freedom and resistance, standing strong for decades against Portuguese attempts to destroy it. By the 1530s, however, Brazil was divided into over a dozen colonies, each controlled by wealthy Portuguese nobles. Most of these colonies struggled and were eventually returned to the Portuguese crown. In 1549, a governor-general was appointed, and Salvador was established as Brazil's first capital. Portugal wasn't the only European power interested in Brazil. France and England, ignoring the Treaty of Tordesillas, tried to stake their claims. The French made multiple attempts to establish settlements but were driven out by Portuguese forces. Later, the Dutch briefly captured parts of Brazil in the 17th century, but they too were eventually defeated. As Brazil faded, sugar became Brazil's new lifeblood. The fertile soil and tropical climate made it ideal for sugarcane cultivation. To fuel this industry, the Portuguese turned to Africa for labor. In the 16th century, they began transporting enslaved Africans to Brazil in large numbers. This marked the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported to Brazil, enduring the brutal Middle Passage and inhumane conditions on sugar plantations. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Brazil had become the largest recipient of enslaved Africans, receiving approximately 40% of all African slaves shipped across the Atlantic, far more than any other colony, including those in North America. This influx of enslaved labor helped Brazil's economy thrive. Plantations produced sugar, tobacco, and later coffee, which became major exports. Minerals and precious stones were also discovered, further boosting trade. By the late 18th century, Brazil was one of Portugal's most valuable colonies. However, this wealth came at an immense human cost, leaving a legacy of racial inequality that echoes through Brazil's history. Also, in the late 1600s, gold was discovered in Minas Gerais, bringing a new wave of exploitation. Thousands of fortune seekers flocked to Brazil, transforming mining towns into bustling hubs. However, the gold rush intensified the demand for enslaved labor, perpetuating cycles of inequality and suffering. At the same time, resentment grew among wealthy Brazilians who chafed under Portuguese taxes and restrictions. The seeds of independence were being planted. In 1807, Napoleon's invasion of Portugal forced the royal family to flee to Brazil. This move elevated Brazil's status from a colony to a vital part of the Portuguese Empire. Schools, banks, and ports were developed, and Rio de Janeiro became the new capital. For the first time, Brazil operated almost as an independent kingdom. Unfortunately, when the Portuguese royal family returned to Europe in 1821, Prince Pedro remained in Brazil as its regent. Inspired by the growing independence movements in the Americas, he declared Brazil's independence on September 7, 1822, famously shouting, "Independence or death," near the Ipiranga River. Soon after, Pedro became Emperor Pedro I of Brazil. Sadly, independence wasn't easy. Brazil fought a war with Portugal from 1822 to 1823, eventually driving out Portuguese forces. Internal conflicts also plagued the young empire. Eventually, Emperor Pedro I abdicated in 1831, leaving the throne to his 5-year-old son, Pedro II. Pedro II's reign saw periods of growth and conflict. Brazil expanded its trade and welcomed immigrants, but tensions over slavery persisted. By 1888, slavery was abolished, marking a major turning point in Brazilian history. Just a year later, the monarchy was overthrown, and Brazil became a republic. Although, the transition to a republic, known as the Old Republic, brought political instability. In 1930, Getulio Vargas seized power in a military coup and ruled as a dictator until 1945. Brazil then endured decades of military rule, economic struggles, and inflation before adopting a new democratic constitution in 1988. Despite its challenges, Brazil has shown resilience and growth. Today, it's the largest country in South America, known for its rich culture, natural beauty, and unique heritage shaped by Portuguese colonization. And that's all for today, folks. If you found this video as fascinating as we do, please don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.